Centre. Moving on then, the Department of Basic Education's plan to introduce the General Education Certificate has raised eyebrows, with some slamming government, accusing Minister Angie Motshekga of being hell-bent on destroying the quality of education in the country. But does the department have a point? Should we create an environment to allow our children to focus on their strengths earlier on than to wait until matric? Well, joining us to discuss this further from our Cape Town studios is former teacher and education researcher Sara Black. Good evening to you, Sara. Thank you so very much for joining us here on Full View on SABC.
Good evening to you, Flo, and to your viewers as well.
So let's start by getting your reaction really then to the introduction of the General Education Certificate. What would you believe to be the pros and the cons?
I think that there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what Minister Motshekga said at the SATU conference during the week. What she is effectively saying is that the department wants to try and standardize the way that the end of grade 9 is assessed. But it's not a huge change from what we already have. People are saying, oh, now can you leave school at the end of grade 9? You always could. The National Policy for Promoting and Progression Requirements has always said that compulsory schooling ends at the end of grade 9. What Minister Motshekga is suggesting is that those assessments are currently conducted at school by teachers, and there's absolutely no standardization across the board. So one of the pros of standardizing across that is if those students wish to move, for example, to a TVET college, they can do so, and when the TVET college gets a certificate from that student coming to them, they know what they're getting. It's not like they're getting a bit of a mixed bag depending on which school the student went to. So that's a really big, I think, plus of having something standardized at the end of grade 9.
Now, we've heard several...
One of the concerns that is...
Yeah, we've heard several, senior lecturers at the various universities saying that often learners are not well equipped or prepared when they reach those institutions of higher learning. Would this perhaps be addressing that in your view? But the concern then is that what would happen if one stopped at grade 9, where if you're going into a higher institution, you would definitely then need a matric certificate. So can you just demystify, that the misunderstandings that you earlier spoke about?
Sure, no problem. This assessment won't in any way change what's happening in terms of the quality of teaching and learning, unfortunately. All it does is give anybody, whether a TVET college or any other school that takes a student coming into grade 10, a more accurate idea of what that student has already achieved. So as a teacher, I was at the head of grade 9 mathematics, for example, and schools were under an awful lot of pressure from various different quarters to start getting a little bit creative with the end of grade 9 marks in order to try and facilitate students pushed through to grade 10. This will stop that from happening. So let's say you're a TVET college manager and you are getting applicants from over 2,000 different schools for positions in your TVET college, all saying, I have grade 9. What the GEC will do, it will say that when I say I've got this mark for maths in grade 9, I've got that mark for English in grade 9, that you actually know that that is the case. Whereas if all the different schools are setting different assessments, they're being marked by different people, and there's no oversight as to how those compare, that TVET college manager doesn't know if he's comparing apples with apples, and that can be a real problem. But does it actually change necessarily the quality of what the student is learning? No, not necessarily. It just means that a student is going to get a comparable end of grade 9 result rather than something that's a little bit difficult to compare with other schools.
Now, my question then, Sara, is do you think that learners at that point of grade 9, I mean, I don't even think that learners in matric are prepared enough to know which career path they're going to choose for the rest of their lives. Is a learner in grade 9 ready to say, you know what, this is not for me, I'd actually rather go to a TVET college, I'd rather get some other kind of skill? Should there not be more testing in the schooling system to establish for real that this is where you want to go?
That's a really great question, Flo. I'm glad you asked that, because personally, I don't think that students are of the maturity or of the kind of position in their own development as a human being and as a person to really know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. And we also know that a lot of people are going to change careers a lot these days. You don't often have a lifelong career. It's a bit of a concern that what we're going to see happening is that the students who are already struggling in school, and normally due to out-of-school factors like coming from poor backgrounds, disadvantaged backgrounds, not speaking the language of teaching and learning in the school, they are the ones who are going to start being automatically shuffled into vocational or technical streams, which are always going to send them into lower paid areas of the economy, if you like. So there's a danger here that we're going to start sorting students, not based on their actual potential, but based on the circumstances and the opportunities they were afforded. The students with fewer opportunities are going to start getting sent to the vocational tracks, and the students who already have advantages, who come from middle-class homes or perhaps speak English or perhaps have internet at home, they're the ones who are going to be able to chase down more prestigious academic types of qualifications. That's a little bit concerning.
And how would we be able to address that? I mean, the fact that a child from a less privileged home could then be told, actually, you know, you should be going to a TVET college, for example. How do we address that, and what role would teachers play under this general education certificate and what the minister was talking about? I'm not sure if she did address that specific part about what role the teachers would then play in that situation.
So no, you're correct. She didn't address that in her address to SATU. The role of the teachers is effectively that we need to start, I'm a high school teacher, but we really need to start supporting and capacitating our primary school teachers far more than we currently do. We know that the backlogs of learning for our poorest and our most marginalized students, it starts at primary school level. One of the ways that we're going to need to do this is to start making sure that we are producing high-quality foundation phase and intermediate phase teachers, and we're producing enough of them. We're going to have a shortfall if we're not careful. Another thing that we need to do is we need to start saying, you know, is it best that our students always learn just in English? There's some excellent research coming out about holding school in translanguaging terms, using the resources the student brings with them from the home. We don't always have to sort of tell the students, you have to learn in your fourth or fifth language. And there's really a good body of evidence that students learn better in languages that they're more familiar with, and they're academically stronger, even if they end up speaking English in the workplace. So that would be the role of teachers, and that would be the role of teacher developers and teacher trainers. But I think also we need to start valuing, as a society, technical and vocational artisans more. One of the reasons that this is concerning is because we know that there's a deep economic divide between people who can access more prestigious forms of work like lawyers, doctors, etc. And we don't really value those artisans who do the types of bread and butter work that actually keep things running. So one of the ways that I think we could address this issue of sorting children based on opportunity rather than on ability is to start to value our artisans more in our economy, to make sure that they're paid a reasonable living wage, and to stop sort of talking in, if I can say, derogatory terms about people who want to become car mechanics or people who want to go into plumbing as compared to doctors or lawyers. We need to see these all as components of our society that are all equally necessary.
Now, I want to stick to the issue of teachers, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is some research that's showing that the majority of teachers currently lack the required content knowledge to teach the subjects that they are teaching, which is very concerning. Will adding technical occupational subjects like applied mathematics and applied science perhaps help that situation?
In fact, I think it would do the opposite. I think what we're now is we're complexifying the curriculum even more, and we're asking teachers to now become even more au fait with different forms of curriculum structures. One of the reasons teachers are teaching the subjects that they're not qualified to teach or capacitated to teach is because they're often having to fill a timetable with subjects that they were never trained to teach in the first place because there are insufficient staff in the school. So as a qualified mathematics teacher, I've been asked to teach English and also to teach history simply because there was no one else to do it. Now, that's not necessarily an indictment on a teacher's ability to teach what they were trained, but it's actually more pointing towards how we're trying to stretch resources across the system in ways that it were never designed to do. Are there issues with some teachers not being able to teach the subjects that they are being asked to? Yes, there are, but there are a lot of interventions in that line as well. But the more we complexify the system by adding more subjects and more streams, the more difficult it's going to be to match the qualifications of the teacher to the requirements of the school.
All right, so I'm just going to ask you sort of personal question, I suppose. I mean, in your view, really, as a former educator and now researcher, what reforms do you believe our education system needs, and what kind of leadership do we need to achieve them? I mean, I'm also looking, you know, as a side note, I'm looking at issues like discipline. I mean, we've been seeing some really crazy scenes coming out of schools. I recently saw some visuals of children, you know, throwing out their desks and their chairs and all that kind of a thing, and I don't remember us having to deal with that in my time when I was in school. What do we need in our schools at this time?
There are many different ways to answer that question, but I'll take it as from the angle that you suggested. Personally, as an educator who's worked in township schools, we need to support our teachers. We need to forge alliances between parents and teachers and students. Again, there's a lot of conflict between teachers and students, which is arising from the fact that the schools are being asked to often overcome barriers and challenges that are not of the school's making. One of the things that is not often talked about is the way that other sectors of the public provision, if you like, are letting schools down. For example, transport is not a schooling issue, but it creeps into schools every day. Security is another issue. So one of the things I think that we need to do for reform is we need to get parents and teachers and students talking together again instead of seeing each other as conflict partners, as seeing each other as adversaries. And there could be an awful lot achieved if we supported our teachers a lot more, and we know, a lot less of sort of saying whose fault is it within the school, rather than saying, okay, actually, is this a school problem, or is this a problem that originates somewhere else?
All right, many thanks to you, Sara Black. Appreciate your input. That's a former teacher and education researcher, Sara Black, giving us some of her views then on the general education certificate, which has raised some concern by many people. And as she said there have been some misunderstandings, and hopefully that's cleared some of your perceptions of the general education certificate. We're going to take a short break.